Hello, everyone, and welcome back to AutoCrit 101. I'm so excited you're here. We're going to go through the next stage of the dev editing process today, developmental editing, where we are looking at our book's content, characters, world building, pace, and all of that. We are going through a whole long series of classes to help you plan, write, edit, and do market research for your books using your AutoCrit Pro member perks. If you are a lifetime member of AutoCrit, then you are a lifetime member to Pro, which gets you access to these tools. You will also have the exact same tools if you're monthly, annual, or 6-month members, and they are unlimited. No caps, no tokens, no nothing like that. If you've missed prior episodes, there is a playlist full of them in the AutoCrit 101 series, and you can get caught up at your own pace there. We've already talked about how to plan a book, how to write a book, and last week we did the first half of dev editing, which is how to do an alpha read using the alpha readers in AutoCrit, and how to do the first half of notations for the dev edit. So we're going to be picking up there today. A reminder for those joining us, none of AutoCrit's tools are going to generate content for you. We do not write or rewrite any part of your work, which means you don't have to check mark the AI generated box for most retailers and publishers unless you generated content outside of AutoCrit and brought it in, or you're using an extension that is not part of AutoCrit that rewrites for you. All of our tools are safely AI assisted. We do not train on member work. Your work is 100% yours. You keep all your rights, and nobody else is going to be getting access to your work unless you give them access with the co-writing tools, or you share them in the forums for critique, or you put them in a public contest. So with that, let's edit a book. Last week, we wrapped up the alpha reads, which is that first big picture level impression of our book. And we started tracking what we have in the book. We were notating last week. We were the surgeons and our books were the patients. And when you go to have a surgical procedure done and you sit down in front of a surgeon, they talk to you about why you're there. They confirm what you're coming in for. They mark you up with the little pins and stuff, and their little acronyms for what they're going to do in these spots. And then they send in the anesthesiologist and they talk to you and they tell you what they're going to do, all before the scalpel ever touches you, right? And that is how a good dev edit should typically be as well. We need a full picture of the book, of our patient here, before we do anything to them. So just keep that in mind. We have notated up to this point. The second half, though, is time to actually make the changes that we have been notating. So we're going to talk about where to start, what exactly you should be doing at this point, and how you know when you have finished a developmental edit and you're ready to move on to the line and copy edits, the technical edits. There are 3 ways to start the revision process up for your dev edit. The first is to utilize the weakest points that you got back in your alpha reader feedback, whether those were from people or whether that was in your AutoCrit alpha reader. We were saving the actionable feedback to notes in last week's class and making action notes for ourselves to go back to, right? Or you could be using sticky notes, spreadsheets, whatever process works for you. But we are making notes on what they all had in common. They all disliked the ending, or they all disliked the opening, or they all felt like one bit in the middle was slow, or they all felt like one bit was confusing. All of these weak points are the big picture areas that readers got hung up on, and that makes them the easiest place to start on a revision. The second option you have is to focus on the foundation and then look up from there. So your foundation is going to be the bones of your story, the plot. What happens where? Making sure that you don't have the holes that we talked about when we did our reverse outline last week to see what we had written, what was in the wrong place, and what was not written yet and had a big gap. Those could be places to fill in and give yourself a nice long spine that you can then add to with strong characters, with good world building. So start there. And your third choice is to go chronologically, to not worry about the foundation more than anything else, or the weakest points more than anything else, to go through the notes you have left for yourself in your book from beginning to end in chronological order. Now, this only works if you are someone who wrote chronologically. If, as a fellow pantser or maybe a planter, you did not write chronologically and your book has to be reordered, this tip will not be for you. You have to get it in chronological order. So I suggest going to the foundation first for my friends like me who are in that boat. What exactly are we doing? Well, we have hinted at this already, but the main purpose of a dev edit is to revise. We want to make our story clearer. We want to make it stronger. We want it to be relatable. We want there to be clarity in our voice and how we see our world. And we want the pacing to be engaging, to keep readers reading this book, even when it's late at night and they should be sleeping. Before I go any further, I have to clarify two terms for you guys, and then we're going to show AutoCrit. We'll get started with these actual revisions. Revisions versus rewriting. Revisions are what we are doing in the dev edit phase. Writing is usually done once you finish your first draft, and then you're revising. You're correcting all or part of a scene or chapter to improve the clarity of that chapter. Rewriting something is to completely erase it. You're not keeping bits. It's all going away. And you're starting over from scratch to implement an entirely different direction for your story. When you make the decision to rewrite as opposed to revise, rewriting is not simpler than revising. Starting all over again is not going to save you time. It is not going to make your process easier. It's going to make it harder. It takes more time to do a rewrite because it's still going to have to be revised. Once you're done with the rewrite, it's going to have to be re-edited. You're going to have to do it anyway. You're putting off the inevitable, and it's going to need more work to get you to that point. So now you've added time. So before you chop something off completely and redo the entirety of it, or maybe chop the whole book completely and go back to your outline and go, well, I'll just do another new outline all over again. Remember this. We are not rewriting just because it's such a mess. It'd be easier to start over. It will never be easier to start over and add all that time and effort to yourself. It's just putting off the inevitable. At some point, you do have to sit down and sort this out with a revision, or else you are going to never write the book and it's just going to constantly be edited, right? We're going to sit there with analysis paralysis. And special note, I shared last week that our planners often are tempted to run away at this point and scrap everything and start on a new outline because they think that the reason they have holes or that their characters aren't fleshed out or their world building's not immersive is because they had a bad outline. And in actuality, you can have a perfect recipe from a super popular chef. And at the end of the day, if you don't execute it in every precise detail the way that chef did, are you going to have the same dish? No. Is that the recipe's fault? No. Our execution is always going to vary. We can have a perfect outline. Perfecting your outline will not perfect your first draft. It will not do it. So let the first draft exist and let's move on here. Let's do some dev editing in action today. We're going to go back to that fiction book that we uploaded into AutoCrit last week, that we started notating in AutoCrit last week, and see what we can do to make it better. Here we are in the AutoCrit dashboard, the main AutoCrit hub. Just like last week, we're going back to the Writer's Desk tab that we have been hanging out in all of these classes. And this week, we actually already have a file. I am going to very briefly touch on the upload button to bring your file in, but please go watch the beginning of last week's class because we talk about how to strip out the formatting that the system doesn't support very quickly, and step-by-step guide to bringing your story in. We're not going to do that today since we did it in the last class, but that is there in the last class if you need it. So remember, come over here, click upload, drag and drop here. Alternatively, you can click add, click the red file button, and copy and paste into here. Just make sure that the file you're copying and pasting from has also been stripped of formatting. You don't get around the stripping of the formatting to bring it in either way. So last week we started on this garbage draft, as I affectionately call my first drafts, right there. We're just going to click on that. And that's going to open this file here. The chapters we identified are right here. If I go back to my notes, where we talk about those action item notes we left for ourselves up here in the top right yellow sticky note button, those notes are also still there. My alpha reader notes, story analyzer notes, other notes that we've taken, all available right there. And if you have started leaving yourselves bookmarks along the way, congratulations, you are one step ahead of me, because that is where we're starting. The first thing you need to do is treat your book like it is somebody else's book. This is the best piece of advice I can give you to be objective about your own work. Forget it's yours for a minute. Take off your author hat. Do not try to explain anything, because when a reader is reading their book, they won't have you there to explain it. Don't try to do any of that yet. Do a read through of your book, beginning to end. The one we did last week with the analyzer gives you quick, at a glance, areas that your book needs to be revised. But at one point, you do need to read your book, beginning to end. And as you are coming across places that need to be corrected, you're going to start leaving yourselves bookmarks. So if, for example, I hated this first line, which I don't, but if I did, I would highlight it. I would click Create Bookmark on the right-hand side, and then I would make myself a note. We're going to put this in a dev edit board and say, opening line is the title of this note. Change the opening line. No main characters, no action. It sucks. Save. And then I am going to make sure that this red select button is checked. This red save button is checked. And that adds a comment. Notate what you don't like. And once you go through and you make all those notes for yourself, then you put your author hat back on and you come back in and revise. And the reason we treat it this way is, one, to be that surgeon looking through and marking up the patient before we take that scalpel to them. And second, is to give us a full view of our actual intended changes. Because if I like the ending and it ties into this beginning, I might change my mind and decide I don't want to cut this opening line after all. This is a perfect fit. It was never about her as much as the vault anyway. So maybe I want to leave this here. And if you're working with a co-writer or an editor who's also an AutoCrit Pro member, they could come in here, put their initials, and say, I actually really like this first line, and then tell it why. Hints at the theme, clear genre, unusual hook, main character is in the next line. And now when I go back through for that revision and I'm ready to actually make changes, I'm making changes with a full thought process of where I want the story to go and not just how I'm feeling in that moment while I'm reading over it. So we're taking the notes that you made last week and putting them straight into your story. The analyzer, if you go back to your analysis tab here and you pull up your fiction analyzer, which is where we started making all of these notes last week, we'll go ahead and give you things, right, to start on. We ran these alpha readers last week, and in there were hashtags where there were things that it wished was different. You could jump to any of these places in the story and make a note right there. Okay, why don't we do this? Highlight this and then go on to the next. Vault strange environment there. Info dumpy. Okay, yeah, sort of info dumpy. This is where we're bringing together the notes we were making last week. We're tying it into bookmarks. So I'm going to show that one more time. Highlight where you want the comment to go, just like in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Click this Create Bookmark button on the right-hand side. choose your board. We're going to make this one pacing. Describing the city for the first time in tested by the bank owners equals to slow. Okay, select it and then save. And now here we have it, that note. And we're making all these notes. We're going to do a complete read through beginning to end. We're going to make sure all of our notes that we made before or that we are now adding to them have been added to the file. We have marked up our patient. We're ready to perform story surgery on them. And then we're going to take that scalpel to it. And we're going to start working through the notes. There's a go-to bookmark tab. And as someone who has worked in Microsoft Word for many, many years, this is one of my favorite teachers because I don't have to click next comment, next comment, next comment, next comment, next comment, hoping to find the comment that I wanted to change. Every single comment you make will be listed here. And you could scroll down this list. There's a scrolling bar right now. I've only got 2. Scroll down that list, click the comment. It jumps to where you wanted to pick up editing. And I often leave myself a note. So if I get down, let's say she's in this chapter and this is where I stop, right? I can add myself a comment here and I'm going to add a note, start here, resume editing here, and it saves that space for me. So I've got this one really long note with everything I want to do, but here we go. So saved, select this red button here, and then create that bookmark. And when you're ready to go back to that chapter again, all you've got to do is go to your go to bookmarks and go, where was I? Where's my start here note? Scroll down a little bit, start here, click, and boom, there it is. This is where I left off. This is how I resume where I was. I would expect this process to take a full week or 2 of your time if you have a few hours a day to devote to it, because it does take a more active attention to detail. And this is so important that at least once you get that full reread on your own content and why you are in creative control of your book, right? This is why you're not hiring someone else, because you want to be the one that decides what your story looks like. Your notes shape how your book comes out. The surgeon's markings shape how your surgery is going to come out. Your notations are shaping how your book's going to look when it's done. The details you decide to cut could make or break a scene. It could change the tone of that scene entirely. Putting it through the wrong person's lens could put us on a totally different path. So read through it once. You've got your places to start, your big pictures and your foundation in the beat sheet, which is what we did last time, this beats and outline portion, missing beats, beats that are out of order, things that you need to flesh out. You have all of those here to get you starting points with notes, but you still need to devote a little time to read the book and just make sure that it looks the way you want it to. If you shortcut getting your book done, you're going to risk missing things. So use the analyzer to help you speed up your alpha read. Use it to help you speed up the reverse outline. Some of the things we didn't look at last time that I also want to recommend you look through while you're doing this are the overall view and chapter view of your story, as well as your characters. Who here has ever made a story Bible or a character sheet at the least, where you know who all the people are in your books? All right, so we got a few. This would be a good time while you're dev editing, since I'm a pantser and a fan of not having to plan extra as much as possible. This is a good time to do 2 birds with 1 stone, especially if this is going to be a series. While you are in here, go to the bottom right corner and see this little cog here. Go to this little cog and click Character Name List. This is where you are going to start tracking things like your main character names, and your side character names and how they were spelled, so that later on when we do the technical edits, we're going to come back to this in line editing next week and in copy editing. And I'm going to show you the reports that AutoCrit has that uses the names that you built here, but you can spell it out right here. Here's all of your characters. And the best part, there's an export button and an upload button. So if this is a series, you can export your full list of character names out of here once you do it for the first book. Book 2 gets started, upload that list straight into here, and it's done. And it's so nice. And then you remember how you spelled that obscure side character that you only saw twice in the whole book. It's very helpful. So go ahead and start that. As you see a character, you go, oh, that's a character I haven't gotten yet. Jump back into your cogwheel and add them. And on your words to include list, this is where fantasy words are going to go. So if you have, a fantasy word or spell, add it to your words to include list. These are words that are not words, but they're words for the sake that I made them up for this language. Same thing here. You can export them, you can upload them, you can add words that you want it to check for, and it's very helpful in the end. So go through it, start your story Bible this way. If you're going to do a series, that is going to be how you do it. Start it there, export it, save a copy. And then let's look over the overview, right? Speaking of characters, we showed them last week. Here's who I think the main character is. And then if I tell it who I think the main character is, it will tell me what it thinks through that view and why they would not be the main character, what would have to change, the kind of character arc they have. She begins as a dutiful, rule-bound guardian. And then the story forces her into choices that push past training and compliance. And then the arc tends toward empowerment and agency. This is a classic noble bright arc, meaning character starts here, has a midpoint, has a dark moment of the soul, and ends up a changed but different, better person in the end, right? As opposed to my darker works where it's an inverted arc a lot of times. They start out low, they hit rock bottom, and then they're dragged up by their bootstraps. So you could track the arc of your characters and make sure that they're following the arc you wanted them to have. You can see who the story is leaning toward for antagonists, for all other kinds of relationship characters. And if you don't know what any of these things are, we have an article about this in the help bubble that goes through the different archetypes. And if you take my story sculptor class, I will go through them in detail. But side characters exist in stories for very specific reasons. And we have each of those here, like the distraction character who's supposed to distract the main character from their main goal, but they're not the antagonist a lot of times. Judy Hopps' parents in Zootopia are opposition characters to her, which is another role here, but they love her. They're opposition characters to her because they don't want her to do it out of selfishness. They don't want to lose her. They're her opposition. But in the end, they still love her. It's not that they don't like her. They're not her villain. They're not her antagonist. Have all these different character types, and you could see if you have them all. And if you don't have them, the system will tell you, or it might grab somebody else the closest to fit those characteristics, and you go, why is this person showing up in more than one? Well, do you have someone that better embodies those traits? If not, that's why they're there. Maybe we need to give some of these traits to other people, strengthen them up. We're not just here to dev edit our main character, we're here to dev edit our side characters. So notate it. What characters do you need to give? Who could have it naturally with their backstory? Give them their own arc, their own purpose. And 2, the system is smart enough to pick up when it's a non-human character here. The bank system in this rule, or in this world, the bank system in this world is the opposition character. It's the main thing keeping her where she is outside of the villain himself. Go ahead and go through your characters. Make sure each one is fleshed out, that there's clarity in them, that it makes sense to you. If it's not who you wanted it to be, choose manually who it is and run it and see what the system has to say about it. World building, setting up what kind of resources these characters would have available to them. Does that make sense in their world? Are they flying cars and yet dressed in medieval clothes and going to an outhouse and cooking in a fire pit? Why do they have flying cars if they're living in an otherwise medieval world, right? Is that just the way things are there? Did they reclaim technology, but only for certain things? Making sure your resources are consistent, geography is consistent. These are elements that tend to fall off while you're writing, but readers look for them, and it really changes their opinion of your fiction. And my memoir people, this bit here is the most often overlooked section of memoirs. This is what makes or breaks a memoir from being immersive to a memoir that just feels like you're sitting there listening to someone ramble on and tell their story. Everybody has a story, and there's interesting elements in everybody's stories, but the stories that you really remember are the ones you imagined in your head as you heard them. You imagined in your head as you read them. Hearing the stories of loved ones get married to your great great grandfather, right? Or someone surviving a war, or someone surviving something else that was traumatic and then coming out better and choosing a better life is so satisfying. But the world building elements showing what you take for granted because you lived it, or what the person telling you what life was like that they take for granted, those little details can put us there with characters instead of just reading about their story on that cold arm's length level. So don't blow past world building just because you're writing memoir. Readers expect good memoirs to read like a story. It just also happens to be true. So we've got this geography, how much of each part of my book takes place in these different places. So bank exteriors, the vault, the magistrate's office, the guardian's dormitory, 34% is inside the clockwork vault. And I can see if that balances up to where I want everything to take place. Top 5 by presence. It explains what each of those places look like, resources that they have available to them and what that means for them, and places where they don't match up or I am inconsistent would all be there. And then finally, chapter level. On the chapter by chapter level, this is the last section I run before I dive into dev editing. At this point, I have run my reverse outline. I've gotten all of my scenes in order. We did that last week, right? I've decided where my bridge scenes are going to go. I've notated where holes are that I need to write new scenes for. I've notated where the scenes are that I want to revise and what for. And then I'm going to go through the chapter level. And I'm going to click Analyze All Chapters. And in each of these chapters, it is going to give me an overview of the synopsis, what happens inside that chapter only, without referencing any of the other chapters. What conflict, internal and external, happens inside of each of those chapters. Who appears in each chapter? Deep point of view. Are there things the main character knows that they shouldn't know? World building issues where I'm inconsistent or I don't describe a place well enough for us to imagine being there in the scene. So they can't smell it, they can't see it, they don't know what it sounds like, they don't know what's going on around the character. Possible contradictions within that chapter only, because this is limited to only the chapter that is selected. So if you have something explained in an earlier or later chapter and it gets it wrong, just ignore it. It's only looking for contradictions in this chapter. Timeline analysis, what happens play by play of that whole chapter, which is helpful for synopsis for my querying people. Foreshadowing and plot thread tracking, what plot threads you've resolved, which plot threads you've introduced, and which ones you're carrying through that chapter. So as you can see here, I've run it in 32 seconds for 10,000 words. I've got the synopsis, and if it's multi-POV, it will tell you whose POV you are starting in, and it will tell you when it's shifted. So the chapter opens from her point of view, and later on it's going to shift around. Conflict, internal conflict, external conflict, tension between her and other people, negotiations at play, characters introduced, and what roles the system thinks that they had in that chapter. Deep point of view, the vault singing, might be supernatural or enchanted phenomenon beyond her understanding, and yet she seems to know where it comes from. Her awareness of its true nature, despite not knowing why it sings or what it is. Again, she shouldn't know that yet. See, what she shouldn't notice or be aware of. Detailed negotiations. True motives of the elves are outside her direct experience. She's never been there. She's never heard them. Why does she know them? So we've got all these things there for deep point of view. World building in the chapter. It's got no flora and fauna descriptions, but it is in an underground tunnel, so I'll give that a pass. Resources that I mentioned, which hints at things for readers, general conflicts, possible contradictions, and then timeline analysis. Here's everything that happened in this chapter. Any main big things would go onto my synopsis if I was trying to query this to an agent. Foreshadowing, what the reader thinks is going to happen next as a result of just this chapter and nothing else in the book. And then here we have plot threads in this chapter: trying to escape, the vault singing, negotiations, and the bank owner manipulating everybody. And then the genre. This chapter reads like it's a fantasy, urban or dark fantasy. Chapters matter when it comes to your openings, especially. What does this read like? Does this read like the opening hook to, in this case, a steampunk dark fantasy? If the answer is no, then you might want to reevaluate how you've structured your book. If you're writing a mystery and there's no hint at a mystery to come, then maybe this isn't your strongest chapter. Maybe we need that hint of a mystery to make sure that that seals the deal for readers who might not read past chapter 1. If this is supposed to be thriller and there is nothing actiony or thrilling in chapter 1, what is going on? Why has nothing happened in that first scene? If this is action adventure, is there something setting up the adventure? There are reader expectations for opening chapters, and so knowing what that is can be really helpful here. And then we have hooks out of here, and then it moves on to the next chapter. What we're doing exactly, I'm going to break it down one last time. You should be notating your story, reading it beginning to end. You should use those alpha reader notes and the reverse outline notes from last time, combined with notes you leave for yourself going through this chapter level, and then go to revise. Revise to your heart's content and try to avoid chopping it to bits and also rerunning this at the same time. We don't have the surgeon go, okay, stop, stitch her up, wake her up. How are you feeling? We're halfway through your surgery. Are you better yet? No? Lay back down, put her back under. Okay, let's keep going. That would be horrifying. And don't do that to your book either. Once you take the scalpel to it, finish the job. Okay, let's get it all the way done, a full revision. And this will also be a good way to know when the book is actually done. People ask me all the time, how do I know it's done? How do I know it's done? Well, you know the story is done when you complete that first full revision beginning to end. You've addressed all the core concerns that you notated, and you don't see any more when you go back and do a second dev edit pass for yourself. Those alpha readers and stuff aren't having feedback. We're going to talk about that in a second. And you've run your piece through a beta reader for confirmation to make sure that you do have all those core plot holes filled in. You know, that second opinion that, hey, I think this is done. The master carpenter measured twice, cut once, assembled everything. They think it looks beautiful. It's polished. The dinosaur we started building last week that we just had a box of bones for is now built in the museum, and it looks great. Sans the decoration because we haven't put on the synthetic dino skin yet. That comes in line in copy editing. All of our bones are assembled, and we bring in the experts and we go, tell me, did I build everything correct? Are the bones in the right place on this dinosaur? And that's where that beta reader gives you that final thumbs up. You did a good job. You assembled the T-Rex just fine. It's time to go ahead and start adding things to it. Not ready for a human reader. Just like with alpha reading, you can create your own beta readers if you are not ready to have a human reader look at your book. We're going to create one today. These are the same steps that we did for Alpha Reader last week, but I'm going to show it again today. And then I'm going to show you some of the differences that it looks for in a beta read. So unlike the alpha read, which we ran last week, that looks for the big picture level plot, pacing, world buildings, you give them a box of unassembled dinosaur bones and go, is this a T-Rex? And they're like, oh yeah, that's a T-Rex. No, that's not a dinosaur. Unlike that, beta readers expect the book to be done. The version they are reading, they expect to go to press with the content the way it is. They know that you're still going to have your grammatical errors and typos, so don't bother doing all your technical edits quite yet. But they expect that the story itself will be finished. So they are going to be stricter on it. When you go to the Select Your Readers tab, you'll notice that all the readers you build for Alpha Read are still there. So if I put this through my fantasy reader for cozy fiction that we created in last week's class, it still has the same core bones, but now it's going to be looking at way deeper stuff than it did. And you can still run first read and remember to add context here. This is still just the first 10,000 words, right? So the context that I already have from last week's would go here. This is the first 10,000 words of a full-length novel. Please do not read it as though it's a self-contained full story. It should read like the opening to a book. And then I'm going to click Start Reading and read it that way. You could also save it and run first read out here if you wish, but that's the additional context button there. If there's something that you know you want to change, you can also run it and put that in additional context. I am going to be cutting out the romance in this chapter. Please read the book as though there were no romance. Ignore the romance scenes. And it will. And that's a good way to see what it would think if you cut it out before you make changes to it. It gives you this feedback and you go, oh, huh, what would happen if I did do XYZ? Drop it in additional context and see what it says before you make the big changes to your book. So that is how you could run one that you've run before and get that impression. The other way would be to create a new reader of your own over here in this little plus sign, because we've already got one that's red. And we're going to click Create a New Reader Profile right here. And I've got some stuff open that I need to close. So create a new reader profile. We're going to give this one a name, Steampunk Dark Fantasy. And we're going to throw some characteristics on it. I love dark fantasy books that are not sci-fi in any way, but that have steampunk elements. Lit RPG is a plus, but not required. No on the page. Spiciness, dark content is fine. Yada, yada, yada. If you've got any comps, you could throw some comps in here. I'm a fan of books like this book and that book. And then click Create Profile. And it's going to read those characteristics and come up with a reader for this story. So this is my Steampunk Dark Fantasy, and it's going to expand on that. Remember, just like we did in Alpha Read last week, to add in specific questions. It cannot train on your work, which means it forgets it the second your book is run. You can't ask it questions later. So treat it like a human beta reader, send it the survey up front, put your survey questions here, and give it an out. Don't say, tell me all the places it's boring, because then it's going to try to come up with a place even if there's nothing boring. Instead, go, are there any boring world building dumps? If so, where? And go ahead and do that. Make sure to adjust your boundaries at the top and bottom. If you want it to be super spicy or if you want it to be super dark, you add that in there. So now I'm going to run the first read on this one as well. We're going to see how they measure up. The beta readers are going to give you much harsher scores. The 66s I got last week drops to 58 when it thinks the book is finished and going out this way. When it thought the book was getting started and was going to be polished, it raised it up in the alpha read. And part of the reason I don't worry about scores for the alpha read at all is because it's that FYI. Here's your starting point. Unless you are just totally different, like less than 50% similar to fantasy, and you say this is supposed to be a fantasy, in which case you're missing major fantasy elements somewhere, my friends. I don't worry about it on the alpha. I do care in beta read. I would like to get my scores up between the mid 70s to mid 80s and retain the rest for my unique author voice. It's okay that it's similar in what a reader would expect 75 to 85% of the time. I do not want my book to be 100% like every fantasy book. It needs to be mine. It needs to be unique. Once it starts creeping into the 90s, I start to sweat and looking for places to make it a little more me, a little more original. If you do get into the 90s, you don't have to sweat too much, but I'm not trying to get 100. I do not want to be every other run-of-the-mill book. I want to be uniquely mine. But 58, that's not good. That is not good. My guess is it's the same issues that I ran into last week since we didn't fix it, right? 79% for this specific reader demographic, 58% from everybody, and a 3.5 star if it was going to give it a star rating. It picked intrigued, and here I get much deeper detail. The premise held their attention. That said, my attention flagged in places where the world piled on images and old technical terms without a firm anchor. Certain scene jumps felt abrupt, and I found myself rereading to confirm who was doing what. It's confusing. The book is enjoyable and thought-provoking in moments, but pacing sometimes wobbles beneath breathless urgency and long internal monologues. So pacing way off point now that I've said the book is done and it hasn't been fixed for any of those things and the info dumps and other things that fantasy authors typically fall into. When I get down to the reader genre, again, I've got some things it likes. However, it reads cozy fantasy that promises safe landings, and this is a dark one. And it says this is darker than my ideal. And therefore, it didn't give it the top marks that it could have. When I switch over to the steampunk dark fantasy, my reader score goes sky high. 93. Because everything that this dark science fantasy reader would love is in this book. But the story could be stronger. This is an important place to point out. I've heard this so many times in the publishing industry. People say, I've seen books worse than mine that make it onto shelves. But you know the reason that books that you feel are less quality than yours make it onto the shelves? It's normally because those books meet what a reader ravenously wants, and they know that market. When you meet your reader promises, even if the story could have been better, the reader's still usually going to be happy. Now, as a perfectionist, this does not make me happy that, oh yes, the readers would be happy. They'd be okay with it, but it's still only 58% from everybody else. I'm still going to try to fix the info dumps and stuff to bring that score up into the 70s. But I'm less worried about the genre elements because what this means is the story itself has some developmental flaws. But the genre elements, my incorporation of dark fantasy and science fantasy and lit RPG, right where I want them. So if you get night and day differences, try to think of it that way. Story score is your actual development of the people, the pace, and the plot. Reader fit are how you've incorporated the genre elements into your work. And ideally, both are going to be in those 70s to 90s range. So if you have something that is in the 70s and you are happy and you read through the notes from these readers and you think, well, I'm happy with it being that way, then I wouldn't worry about it. Move it along the track, you guys. If you get in there and you're like, oh no, this is a good point. I don't like that. Put it in your notes. And again, avoid the temptation to just go back and start cutting again. Notate it again. If you've got core issues that are still bothering you, do a notation, maybe not do a full reread of your book, but do a notation of those things. Find the spots in the book that you need to fix those things in, then revise them, and then go back and do it one last time. When you're happy with these scores, then you know it's time to use your human beta readers if you're going to use them, and then finally, when you get that thumbs up of approval, let that thing go. It's time to line edit. So in wrapping up today, I want to remind everyone that next week we are going to have line editing for all genres. Okay, you guys, thanks so much. If you write nonfiction, hopefully I will see you tomorrow.